In this topic, we're going to be looking at ways that we can analyze vector data. Some of the things you have already experienced a little bit in the exercises for the course so far, and some of these may be new. Before we get into analysis, there's an important thing to point out. The best practice for doing analysis, especially with vector data, is you start off with a coordinate system that is going to be common for all of your data and used for your analysis. Project everything to match that projection system or that coordinate system. And the reason why we do that is projected data is better for measuring lengths and areas, which makes it ideal for what we need to do in spatial analysis. And so this is a habit that you should get into when you're working on a project. If you are provided a coordinate system to use, or if there's a logical coordinate system for that area, use it. And use the best possible coordinate system for how you're trying to portray the data, the one that gives the least amount of distortion to your study area, no matter what size it is. And then make sure that all of your data is in that coordinate system. That's the best way to minimize spatial error using vector data. All right. So queries again, we looked at those a little bit before, but here we're going to make another distinction with them. Queries are basically asking questions to solve problems of one kind or another from your data set. And we can do two different types in GIS: aspatial queries that are not necessarily linked directly to space and give a spatial response, or spatial queries that do. So here's some examples. An aspatial query, all property parcels with a value greater than 100,000. We do those with SQL statements. And then compared to that are spatial queries, where we're asking space a question. So all property parcels that lie completely within the floodplain. So we have to know what the floodplain is and what the property parcels are and whether they are within the boundaries of the floodplain. So that's spatial data. And that space is something that we can use as a form of a query in GIS programs. Here's an example of selecting by attributes from a table or a data set which has both spatial information and the table information. So our question is, we want to select aspen stands from a data set that has all forest vegetation in it. And so we use the SQL query builder. In this case, the variable is covtype and the code is TAA. So we do a search, or we query the data set for all polygons where covtype equals TAA. It gives us a visual response on the map, selects records in the table, and we can calculate statistics on information in the table. Shown here, area in meters squared, and then perhaps call a graph or create a graph of that information, the frequency of observations within the table. So things that we've done many times before in the exercise at this point in time, but it's just to review. Here's querying. And so when we have queries that we can pose of our data set, one of the things we're very interested in geography is figuring out, well, what are the patterns of where these things are? And so using that same example of aspen stands, we might say, well, are they randomly scattered on the landscape? Do they tend to cluster in particular locations? Are they found in particular areas? What are those distributions of the stands and their densities? And not only that, but then we're also perhaps examining other characteristics of the landscape. So in order to do further analysis of where these stands are, we might wonder about soil patterns, soil types, soil texture, climate, if climate varies across this study area in terms of precipitation and temperature patterns, aspect, what side of a mountain is the stand located, for example, is it north facing, south facing, things like that. So we're looking for, again, patterns that make sense, patterns that help explain what we observe and measure on the surface, and we do that by incorporating many different kinds of data into our analysis. So if we have a selection, or a selection of aspen trees, we might query that further and refine the data. And so we can say, are there any mature stands with large trees and open crowns, and where are those portions of the population of this particular type of tree? And so the variables that we're querying here, tree size is 96, and the density or our crown cover in 96, so measurements that were made in the year 1996. So the tree size equals L for large, and A is the code for open crowns. And if we do this query asking for both L and A, then we're only going to get the stands from the previous selection that meet those criteria. So we are further restricting, or as the slide says, isolating areas for a more close analysis of their characteristics. And then the new selection is smaller than the initial selection. And we not only can search and query the tables, we can query space. So if we're still considering aspen stands, we can ask what fraction of the stands are intersected by roads and get a count of those. We could also refine that particular query by saying, well, how many roads are going through them, and what are the lengths of the roads in total or in any particular polygon. We might also ask spatial questions like what types of trees are adjacent to our aspen stands, and then figure out the species composition of an area, and the ones that are close to the aspen are their relationships between those different species, those types of things. So GIS allows us to not only search and query the table, but we can query the space associated with those tables. And another type of a spatial query is looking at surfaces. So remember that vector data is really good for discrete phenomena, and rasters are really good for looking at continuous surfaces. So we can query our rasters by posing a question, and in this case we're interested again in aspen. So do aspen stands occur above 1,500 meters of elevation? So we query the raster and say, here's our the one thing that's in it, elevation. So basically we're telling it to give us all of these cells where elevation has a value greater than 1,500, so greater than 1,500 meters. And on this particular set of figures, on the left is the DEM with the aspen stands shown over them. And on the right is the results of the query. So the green represents the elevations greater than 1,500, and the more wheat-colored, amber-colored area, or sandy area, is where their elevation is less than 1,500. All right, so we can query rasters to get information out of them as well. To get a better handle on how queries work in GIS, we're going to develop a couple of things that you're probably familiar with from your prior education. But briefly, we're going to look here at set theory and then a kind of logic in a few slides. So set theory works by taking variables, whatever they happen to be, and we're applying categories to them. So here, for example, we're saying that T is our data universe. It's all students located at a particular university. A is all students from New York. B is geography majors. C is English majors. So we use queries to pose questions of the data sets that we have, and here's our data set, to get responses from it. So this works very much like how we develop queries for tables of information. If we're looking for a single criterion from our data using the same data universe, if we want to select students from T, where home state equals New York, then we pose that question in SQL, or select students from T where major equals geography. So home state is a variable, it's a column in a table, and the entries for New York for each student will obviously be those folks who are from there. And again, the variable major will contain either geography or English, and so we will get those as the response from that query. When we're building queries, we can use more than one criterion at a time, even within the same variable. Here, for example, let's use the same data universe, and we want from the home state variable to select all of the students who are from New York or the students from New Jersey. And so the response that we get from the table or the data universe will be both of those conditions. Okay, the students either from New York or from New Jersey, either one satisfies the query. The second statement is those students who are from New York who are also geography majors. So we're combining two different variables at the same time within the same SQL statement. And so if you think about the logic that might be involved here, we could make a chain of multiple criteria that are being used within a single query. As long as we build the query properly, we can search many different variables at the same time to get records out of that table or the data universe. There's a very important distinction to remember about and or as operators in how we're building SQL statements. If you use and, then both conditions must be true in order for a record to be selected. If or is the operator that you're using, then either condition may be true and will select a record. Okay, so and requires both conditions. So in this case, we're looking at home state and geography. Both must be true in order for a student to be selected. If it's home state New York or New Jersey, either of those can be true for a student, and we're going to get a response selected out of the table. So and or are known as Boolean operators in ArcGIS and in other programs. They're Boolean logic. So we have two different conditions, and we're comparing those to each other. A and B, so the variables that we're searching and the terms we're using, the quantities we're looking for, are A and B in these examples. So using Venn diagrams to show the overlap between these different sets of data in our table, A and B is shown here. That's the intersection where we have both conditions being true as blue, and where they're false is white. So conceptually, think about that and apply it to the examples we just looked through. A or B shows up, and the entire diagram is blue. Okay, and what's going on here? Well, remember that and means both conditions must be true, or means either condition is true. So and is more restrictive, and or is going to be more open in terms of how it is selecting information out of your table. So here, using our familiar data universe, selecting students from T, home state equals New York, and major geography. So A and B is going to give us the intersection where both conditions are true. So here we have home state equals New York or major equals geography. So either condition being true will give us a record, and what we're going to see is either condition then gives us a true response from the data set. Okay, so this and or is something to really be aware when you're formulating a query, which one you're using and what you're going to get out of it in terms of the types of records that are going to be selected from your table. Here's some more examples using our same data universe. I'm selecting from T where major equals geography and major equals English. B and C. Selecting from T where major equals geography or major equals English. B or C. Okay. Selecting students from T where state equals New York and major equals English. A and C. Select students from T where state equals New York or major equals English. Then A or C. So you can write a question out in standard English, and then you need to convert it into this kind of logic if you're using Boolean operators in order to formulate your query. If it's not just quantitative information that you're looking at, if you're looking at here categorical, nominal types of data, then Boolean logic is what you can use to select, it can be one of the ways that you can select information from your table. So let's add a couple more Boolean operators to and or. We can add XOR and not. XOR is known as exclusive or. Essentially, it's the inverse of and. Well, what you're getting out of that XOR command with A and B is you're excluding where both cases are true. Okay, so where you've got both A and B, the intersection, they're both true, that gets excluded, and you select all of the other cases, all of the other records in the table. Not is fairly straightforward. A not B means everything that's A, and you're going to get rid of everything that had B. So those are two. If you need to do those kinds of exclusions from your data to exclude certain records, we can use XOR and not to do that. So this is more or less a discussion slide that we use in a live class to go through and make sure that students are understanding what these different operators are doing. You can do this yourself at home by pausing the animation here or pausing the video and just taking a look at the data universe that we have on the left and those relationships that we're showing with the essentially Venn diagrams, showing the overlaps between the different sets, and then looking through that list of applied operators and knowing what the operators do, which is a summary of it in the other graphic, and then make sure that you understand what and, or, XOR, and not would do given those particular operations, the sequences, A and B, B and A, B not C, etc. So make sure you understand what these things are doing before you leave this slide.